If you are interested in exploring these topics further, learning and connecting with like-minded individuals, check out the 3 Patreon discussion groups available. Just visit theinfinitesparkofbeing.com and click the participate button. I also offer a free meditation group online every Sunday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern. Just go to any of my social media profiles for the link found in my link tree. There's no pressure to be on camera or to actively participate in any of these groups. Just come and listen and enjoy. Join an online spiritual community of everyday people committed to understanding the human experience more deeply through spiritual practices that we can apply to our everyday lives. Join us. Welcome to the Infinite Spark of Being podcast. My name is Keith Welsh, and today we're getting into a very strange and deep cut of ufology. The reason I'm getting into this is because, once again, I think that we're going to be getting to a place in the next 5 to 7 years where our consciousness as a species is going to shift drastically, and the phenomena will begin to show itself more readily. One of my fears, as I mentioned in episode 176, is that the government is going to begin crafting a narrative around the phenomenon that is false and fearful. They're going to try to take the spiritual component out of this. It will attempt to control and release that information, but I do believe that that control will be thwarted by these other beings. And I know that this is where I'm going to lose some of you, and I understand that completely. This is a wild topic, and I tend to say some wild things in these episodes, so I get it. But what is about to happen is that all of the playing we've done within the metaphysical, right? All of the games we've played spiritually are going to turn out to be true. And as much as some say that they hope it's all real, they hope that there's a heaven, they hope all these things, I do ultimately believe it will be very frightening. And most will resort to fear, and they're going to buy into that narrative provided by their pseudo-father figure, the American government, the military-industrial complex. And as ready as I might sound to talk about some of these things, I still get very self-conscious. On some level, I feel like I've kept a lot of my beliefs and thoughts on these topics to myself, relatively speaking. If you're close to me, then I guess I haven't kept them to myself, but they tend to get laughed at or just kind of like joked off and whatever. But on this podcast, I don't think I've gotten too crazy until recently. I guess when they look back, you can all say it was episode 76 where Keith began to sound like he was losing his mind. So the topic that I'm clearly dragging my feet on is this concept that Earth is a prison planet. Now, for some of you, that maybe you don't dive this deep into the UFO lore like some of us, but this is probably going to sound insane. But it is actually something that in ufology, it gets brought up often. It gets dismissed, though. Now, the reason I believe it gets dismissed is because of the fractured nature of UFO research. Many of the UFO experts are basically nuts and bolts people. They tend to avoid at all costs the possible and more than likely spiritual nature of the phenomenon. Recently, we've heard the term soul farm being used. And when it does get tossed out there, people tend to lock up. They don't like that idea. And the reason they don't is because of my favorite show to hate, Ancient Aliens, the History Channel's half-cocked grab at ratings. So to clarify, the term soul farm is used in the title of the book that came out this year by Steve Kim. I don't believe he invented it. I haven't read the book, but it probably falls in line with comments made by countless experiencers over the years that Earth is a kind of farm. Whitley Strieber, author of Communion, he said the same thing. But I think the original was probably this lady, Matilda O'Donnell McElroy. She was a nurse in the U.S. military. And she apparently interviewed one of the aliens at Roswell. The alien told her that his name was Air, and that Earth was a type of prison planet. However, the most common in this UFO lore is probably around the Anunnaki. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about this, but not from the typical ufological point of view, but from a spiritual perspective. I feel that we've done enough. We've heard everything we need to hear from the Anunnaki-loving dolts at Ancient Aliens who have managed to build an entire career out of Zecharia Sitchin's mistranslation of Sumerian texts. Now, the reason I feel confident in saying this is that, well, A, I test high for entitlement on personality tests, and B, every time one of these jackasses who sits around jacking off to pictures of the Egyptian pyramids talks about this stuff, they bring up texts that they clearly haven't read. And I swear to God, my skin crawls when they mention nuclear weapons in the Bhagavad Gita. Incidentally, if you'd like to learn more about the Bhagavad Gita, go to my Patreon and sign up for the Insight Group. We meet on the second Wednesday of every month to discuss the Gita. Now, there are a lot of rabbit holes to go down when it comes to this concept of humans being prisoners on a planet. None of them will be discussed today. So if you're interested in listening to someone fumble through this idea, referencing texts they know nothing about, go ahead and do that. Watch Ancient Aliens. God knows I do when I want to get frustrated and roll my eyes into the back of my head. But first, before you do that, listen to this podcast. So I think a lot of this gets a bit lost in translation. I also realize how unappealing it is to think about being on a prison planet or even being livestock on a farm. But let's take a look at it. When we look at Gnosticism, the Kabbalah, Hinduism, Buddhism, even Christianity and Islam, we see this concept that we as souls are experiencing an illusory material world that we need to find our way out of or find our way back home from. So the degree to which there are histrionics, finger wagging, and hand wringing varies from group to group. Some believe that this human experience is a giant mistake that needs to be corrected, while others, myself included, believe that it's an experience that we've created for ourselves, and it's due to our forgetfulness, and this is simply a process of remembering the divine self, the soul, the Atman, as Krishna teaches us in the Bhagavad Gita. The path you follow, that's going to be dictated by your karma. And some folks need to be chastised and threatened in order to wake up, and others simply don't. So the bit that I believe gets lost in translation, or at least misunderstood, is the use of the words prison and farm. I mean, the original role of a prison was to hopefully teach a lesson so that the offending party might be released back into the world, never to commit the same violation again. I mean, if you're a real piece of shit back in the old days, they would just kill you, right? Now, I realize this is also a very generous definition of prison, but the actual definition is a building in which people are legally held as a punishment for a crime they've committed or while awaiting trial. This could be seen as a bardo state or purgatory. Bardo is used in Tibetan Book of the Dead as essentially Buddhist purgatory. For instance, you could look at it like this. Due to the unskillful attractions and diversions of the mind, we have found ourselves here on earth, working through those attractions and diversions, becoming more skillful so that we may move on when our time comes. And maybe the trial piece is the next bardo, as mentioned in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, where we are either going to move past all of the distractions or we just get sucked back in. Either way, there has always been some sort of weighing of our deeds at the end of this birth. In fact, many near-death experiencers have talked about experiencing a life review where at the end, they're just sent back into their body because they have more work to do. And maybe that's the trial. Either way, I don't think that it's beyond the realm of possibility, at least in a spiritual sense, that Earth could at the very least be seen as a curriculum, as a school, a class, or prerequisites for the next semester, right? Now, before I digress too far, let's look at the word farm. The word farm means an area of land and its buildings used to grow crops and rearing animals, typically under the control of one owner or manager. Things are grown on a farm. They are planted, cared for, given the proper conditions so that they may flourish and be harvested and gathered up when the time is right. In that definition, the idea of a farm is a bit easier to swallow. And as for who the manager is, this is all managed by higher beings that serve an even higher being. Trauma responses, anxiety, ruminating thinking, grief and loss, stress, these are all reoccurring patterns in the mind. They're often the result of reacting the same way over and over again. Why do we do this? Because the mind believes the past is still here, happening now, causing the nervous system to respond accordingly. What the mind perceives, the body feels. Mind Transformation and Restructuring, MTR, offers a pathway to release these patterns. It guides both the mind and the nervous system out of these repetitive cycles and into a lighter, freer way of being. If this resonates with you, feel free to reach out via direct message or through the contact section at theinfinitesparkofbeing.com. You don't have to live the way you've been living. Change is possible. Or a greater good. So now that we have these two definitions out of the way, let's conduct a thought experiment. Let's play with this idea of communication with a being from some other dimension or galaxy. These beings in the UFO lore tend to communicate telepathically, so they are projecting thoughts into the mind of the experiencer. In fact, most communication, whether it's with spirits, interdimensional beings, deities, or some other ultra-terrestrial, is done telepathically. Why would we be able to receive these messages if we ourselves don't communicate that way? Well, because we have the ability, but it lies dormant in most of us because we have all these other ways to communicate. We've essentially atrophied that muscle. Now, before I digress too far again, I want you to consider the issues with translation. Think about the issues that come up when it comes to the spoken word, right? The Bible is filled with them, whether it's from Aramaic to Hebrew, Hebrew to Greek, Greek to English. It's a complicated thing. I mean, it shouldn't be. They managed to figure it out when it comes to the Vedas, but, I'm sure it's fine. In fact, I'm positive there weren't any translation issues that had broader cultural implications down the road. It all worked out fine, I'm sure. Anyway. The point is that if there can be these issues with translation of the spoken word, then I'm sure it can happen telepathically. The reason I'm making this point is because this idea of the prison planet is what our government and, quite honestly, I believe the evangelicals are going to use to paint these ultra-dimensional beings as demonic. I believe that they will paint some as good and others as bad. And if the way in which the Old Testament was flipped upside down, literally upside down by the powers that be due to their own greed, fear, and their own, quite frankly, possible demonic possession, then how on earth can we trust these unremarkable husks that we refer to as as our political and military leaders? I mean, haven't they proven to us beyond a reasonable doubt that they will absolutely continue to create false flag events to coerce the American people into unwinnable forever wars meant only to fill the pockets of the military-industrial complex? I mean, we already know that they will absolutely create an enemy to fight, pay the enemy, arm the enemy, then say, man, we got to get rid of these heavily armed, well-funded terrorists. We cannot trust the power structure with anything. They have and will continue to lie to us. These power structures have hijacked our spiritual progress in the past, and they'll do it again. This is why this spiritual path is the path of personal responsibility and self-reliance. We cannot leave our spiritual evolution as a species up to the powers that be. We already did that, and look what happened. We now have quote-unquote religions that get tangled up in political ideologies. We were supposed to have a separation of church and state. This means that we have supposed to have the ability to separate our politics from our spiritual beliefs. However, if the practitioner is engaged in religious and political dogma, then this separation doesn't work. When we adhere to these fear-based fucking religious systems that don't question their own ideas out of the fear that their pseudo father figure in the sky will punish them for asking why, like some kind of drunk dad that makes their kid clean the bathroom with a toothbrush for no reason, then we end up rutted and following along with ideas and policies that don't make any sense. Look, this is the precious human birth, and it's regarded as precious for a reason. The reason is because here on earth, in these bodies, we are able to reason and think critically about our lives. We have the ability to extricate our awareness from the biological imperatives of the human body and for a moment be free of the leadership of the senses. This is everything we're trying to do. So if this is a prison planet or prison realm, then it's one with a work release program. And that program allows the inmate to free themselves to a point where they don't have to return. Now, if this is a farm, then it's a farm where we are planted and allowed to grow and flourish. And sure, you can get into the idea of being harvested if you'd like, but that perspective seems like something you might want to take a look at. Personally, I rather like the idea of being planted so that I might grow, or the idea that by my own actions, I have found myself in a situation that I must work through. And if I apply myself, then I might free myself. What I find quite funny is when these ideas are proposed, most Americans react with this attitude like they are offended at the idea of being manipulated without their knowledge or consent. And to them, I say, advertising, COVID, forever wars, voting, processed food, and general American exceptionalism. Now, many religious and spiritual systems have regarded the human birth as a mistake or a punishment. But you don't have to live like that. Look, for some, this is going to be a horrible experience. For others, it won't be. There is someone right now that has less than you, and they're smiling. Perception is reality. How you regard, understand, and interpret things will dictate your experience, and your experience is your responsibility. Some of these religious systems have you starting from a place of fear and negativity. They've hijacked your spiritual evolution. They've talked you into this belief where the world is a filthy, disgusting place filled with evil and depravity. That perception is a dangerous place to start from. Also, where the fuck are these people hanging out? And if you agree with them, where the fuck are you hanging out? What in the hell are you watching? Look, if you're one of these people, open Netflix. There's a documentary called Dancing with Birds. Watch it. And when you're done watching that, open up Prime. Search for a sitcom from the 80s called The Bob Newhart Show. There's also Frasier, The Office. You can watch Seinfeld. Watch these things for 1 week rather than whatever the fuck you've been watching that has you convinced that the world is a vibrating, glowing trash fire. But seriously, there's a lot of wild stuff going on right now. Some of it's really super dangerous. However, we're also on the edge of the greatest shift in human consciousness known to mankind. We're on the edge of the age of Aquarius. I believe it's dawning. I believe we're about to enter the Satya Yuga, an age of harmony and technology and awakening. Things are changing, but with that change, there is going to be a period of jarring, scary things. Personally, I love the idea of cultural upheaval, something that challenges the religious and political power structure, something that forces them towards the truth of our divine existence, something that forces them to expose their manipulation, to pull back the curtain and terrify those folks that bought into their promotion of these jingoistic policies and these fear-based political ideas that they've disguised as a religion. This is a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's not God, it's demonic. This birth, regardless of the spiritual path, has always been about the work of self-improvement, self with a capital S. You work to free the soul. How you got here? Well, if you ask the Abrahamic theological turf war troops, then it's a lot of shame and finger wagging. But if you ask anyone else, the responses vary from you wanted to go through the human realm for your own edification to you have forgotten your own divinity and you need to remember. Pick whichever one feels aligned with your karma, with your needs. They were all put here for us to find our own path up the mountain, a way for all of us to become liberated souls. We all don't learn the same way. We won't die the same death, and we won't all free ourselves by the same means. And with that, I love you, I love you, I love you. We've done this so long together. All of us, we've all been through this before. And we're going to do it again. And thank you. Bye. If you enjoyed this content and would like to support its creation, visit theinfinitesparkofbeing.com. There you can explore the various ways to get involved and support this work. Click the About button, read a little bit about me, and see what I have to offer you through the one-on-one sessions. Don't forget to check out the Patreon tiers, where we're building a community of everyday people with not-so-everyday interests. You'll also find the online apparel store. And as always, head over to the Participate button and join us. Together, we're growing a community of spiritual seekers just like you.